We are recording. Thanks to everyone who is joining us online. There are a large number of people online. I will attempt to do what my mother always told me to do and project my voice because the mics up here are not working. I'm Ann Phillips. I am the Special Assistant to the Governor of Virginia for Coastal Adaptation and Protection. And we're here to talk with you this evening about some of the actions the state is taking in that context and to learn from you about the things that you are seeing here on the ground in this area, in this community. Joining me this evening from Vision Planning and Consulting, assisting with setting all this up, are Ms. Ashley Simoniski, who is in the back, and also Ms. Emily Sokol, who is right here. We have a few more folks joining us, so please come in. I have been with the governor's office for about 3 years. The position was new, created by the 2018 General Assembly, so I have the honor to be the first person to be in this job. And we are heavily engaged in the last few weeks of creating Virginia's first coastal resilience master plan, which will be a springboard from which the objective is the state will begin to develop a long-standing reiterative process to plan to adapt and protect Virginia's very valuable and very vulnerable coast. Also, in the spirit of full disclosure, I served 31 years in the Navy as a surface warfare officer. I spent a lot of time here in Dahlgren on the base. I had the honor to command and commission USS Mustin, DDG 89, had a new Aegis baseline. Anybody that works here knows what that means. And knows you mean it spent a lot of time here. I was also part of the Zumwalt down select decision. At the time it was known as DD 21, spent 6 months here then. And of course have driven up and down through here many, many times in my life. So I'm happy to be back here. Many things have, as I've driven up and down over the years, many things have changed, but this is a beautiful facility here. This used to be a field and a bunch of woods. Most of you probably know that, but honored to be here this evening and have the opportunity to talk with all of you and share with you some of the work the state is doing. As we get started, because we're all, at least those of us who are here in the room, kind of masked up, it would help me if people introduce themselves and say, why are you here? What are you concerned about in your neighborhood, your property, where you work? What brought you to this meeting this evening? If you don't want to share your name, that's absolutely fine. Just say what's on your mind. That'll help us focus on things that matter to you. We know who Emily is, so we'll start over here. Sure. Thank you for coming. Ma'am? Just down the road, all right. All right, thank you for being here this evening. Ma'am? Okay, thank you for joining us. Sir? Thank you for joining us. We met. Sir? Thank you for coming. Thank you. Ma'am, sir? Sir? Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. All right, I can do this. I'm very gracious for attending. Thank you for coming. So thank you all, and thank you all to the many who are joining us online. We can't see you. You can introduce yourself in chat if you would like. We appreciate it. I'd like to go briefly over what we're going to cover this evening. If I had a mouse that worked, we'd be in good shape. All right. Next. Aha! Do it the old-fashioned way. So we'll talk a little bit about the state's definition of coastal resilience, and more broadly the actions the state is taking and why, and then talk with you about some of the things you're seeing in your community. and then how the state is moving forward with this master planning process. So this definition of resilience comes from the U.S. Global Climate Change Research Program. We thought it best to use something that was already in use, accepted, understood, and certainly documented from an academic perspective, but strengthening communities' ability to anticipate, prepare, respond to, and recover from hazards, as well as minimizing damage to social well-being, public health, the economy, and the environment. For this first iteration of the master plan, we are very much focused on the coastal flood hazard, meaning that we are less focused on stormwater-caused flooding. However, we realize that is a very important segment of the challenges people are facing across coastal Virginia, which we are defining for this the purposes of this master plan as all of the 8 coastal planning districts and regional commissions from Northern Virginia to Hampton Roads, including Richmond, Crater, George Washington, Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck, Accomack, Northampton, and Hampton Roads. The threats and the impacts to those planning districts and regional commissions are different depending on where you are. More rainfall and stream flooding in the northern and more inland planning districts, more coastal flooding and nuisance flooding in the coastal, 3 rural coastal, and certainly Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. But we realize we have all of these things as factors impacting people's lives and the way they go about doing their daily business Commonwealth-wide. But for this first iteration of the master plan, we are focusing on the coastal flood hazard. So whether that's tidal or nuisance flooding, which we're experiencing a lot in Hampton Roads, that's very near where I happen to live, Llewellyn Avenue, for those who are familiar with Norfolk. Storm surge flooding or increased rainfall intensity, duration and frequency. Rainfall flooding, Virginia has itself quite a few challenges in its future in this regard. And the intent of the state is to move forward to try to collaborate across and between planning districts, regional commissions, localities, communities, other stakeholders, and also to begin to try to build capacity within communities and planning districts and regional commissions that don't have perhaps enough staff or enough time or money to do some of the things they know they would like to do, either from a research perspective or from a planning perspective, so that we can try to bring people along together and not have communities who are well-funded making a lot of progress while other communities with equal need are being left behind. Right way. So our challenge in coastal Virginia, in the 8 coastal planning districts that I talked about, 6 million of the 8.3 million people live in that area, almost 70% of the population. We've experienced a considerable amount of flooding, certainly in 2018 and 2019, not quite as bad in 2020. So far, knock on wood, we're doing okay in 2021. Haven't had the big coastal storm yet and have not had too much damage from storms coming up from the south, from the Gulf Coast, although we have had some. We also are blessed or cursed with the fastest rate of change of relative sea level rise on the east coast of the United States, caused by a number of factors, waters rising, and particularly in the Hampton Roads and rural coastal communities in the southeast, land subsidence is also a problem that is adding to the circumstance. Why we are seeing more flooding? Well, we've talked about rising waters. We've talked about sinking land, particularly in the southeast. Intensity of rainfall increasing, and more storms with more intense rainfall, and what we built and where we build it. So maybe not as much of a problem here, certainly a big problem in much more urban areas where runoff and the challenges that go with it are an ever increasing problem because there's just not capacity to handle the stormwater, the levels of which we know are increasing. So we worked with a consultant over the course of the past 8 months. If you think 8 months is not very long to do a coastal master plan, you are correct. It is not, but we had an opportunity to start, and so we did. And this first phase of the plan will lay out not only what we've learned, but also our path forward. Looking at the coastal flood hazard again, this is tidally influenced or storm-driven flooding for this area in King George, we looked at and measured with Dewberry 9 separate coastal flood events and ran a series of analyses to understand what each of those flood hazard events would mean in the future. We used the state selected standard for sea level rise scenario planning, which those of you may be familiar with this know as sea level rise planning curves from 2017. We selected the intermediate high scenario and looked at it across a series of time horizons, baseline to 2020, 2040, 2060, 2080, and we've just added 2100 at the request of several of the cities. That work is not yet complete. But if you look at it in this context, which is 40 years, 2020 to 2060, you can see changes, especially in the farther reaches of the estuaries where some of you are probably either residing or quite familiar with. And certainly there is an impact. I don't see if the pointer works. Oh, wow. Ashley, did I have to turn this on again? Yeah. Oh, okay, not working. So certainly there is an impact in the higher tidal reaches. I know from experience there's some impact on the facilities, the base, and then the southern portion of the base as well. And those of you who live here could probably tell us a lot more. And there's a reason I'm bringing that up, because we have maps here that show this in more detail. And once we finish this presentation, if you'd like to look at those and tell us where you see flooding problems in your community, whether it's rainfall or coastal, we would like to know, because that helps us zero in on areas that we should spend more time on in the future. Looking at the southern part of the lab here, between 2040 and 2060, you can see a lot of difference in some areas, both to the east and inland as well. And you can also see the communities that are most exposed to coastal flood hazard, again, using that same 40-year time frame. So coastal along the Potomac River, some of the tidal streams and estuaries, also up into some of the more riverine circumstances, you'll see a change where not only is there going to be more water, but more people will be impacted by that water over time. Something that's, I would expect, is extremely familiar to all of you, which is why you're here. Now, you're in a not heavily populated area. So looking at this comparison in 40 years, about 180 more people, 150 more buildings, possibly 1,300 more acres of land, will see more water more often. I talked about the 9 coastal flood hazard layers we looked at. That doesn't mean land will be inundated all the time. It just means it will be inundated more often. In some areas of the state, we found, particularly the more, again, southeastern areas, that what is today the 100-year storm, or a storm that you might have has a 1% chance of occurring in one year, any given year, becomes a 2-year storm by 2080, meaning it has a 50% chance of occurring in any given year. So that means, doesn't mean the areas are flooded all the time. It just means there will be more water more often, and that will have more of an impact on the surrounding communities. So part of our discussion this evening with all of you is, what do you think causes flooding in your neighborhoods, in the areas where you work and where you live? What do you think your challenges are? And how long has this been going on for you? And what do you think is most at risk in your community from flood damage? Now, some of you are here because you mentioned your personal private property is impacted. So another question might be, how long, or has your home ever been impacted directly by flooding? Or do you expect that as a threat to you in the future? I'm going to go on to the next couple of slides here, because we can have this discussion once we get going, but especially for the people who are online, just so they can see what else we're talking about here. Flooding can impact all of us in a lot of different ways. In my personal case in Hampton Roads, just thinking about high tides alone, especially the lunar cycle, which we're about to go back into this week, particularly with the weather that's coming through, you may decide you have to change the way you go about your daily business. You may decide you have to go to work a different way, or to a doctor's appointment, or take your child to school in a different way. You may have challenges getting access to community resources. You may find that your septic systems are impacted negatively. I grew up in a house with a septic system, so I've got plenty of experience with that unfortunate circumstance as well. And you may find that there are impacts to other community resources or infrastructure. And if so, we're interested to hear that as well from your perspective. And we're also interested in talking with you, just as we move through the conversation this evening, about how you work. And so you have some of your planners here from King George County and some of your county administrators and managers. Where do you get information if there is a disaster or a disaster is pending? Where do you get information on that? Do you feel that you have challenges with internet or not? Is that an issue for you or is it not? And if you had to evacuate, where would you go? Now, conveniently, this particular part of the state is not in a hurricane evacuation zone. So that's not something that is a typical thing that might happen here, although it hasn't happened much even in areas that are in a hurricane evacuation zone. It's only been activated by the governor once, and that was in 2018. But you are still at risk, and there still may be circumstances where you would be asked to at least leave your neighborhood or some of the coastal communities, depending on the kind of circumstances which could take place. And if you have lived along the coast long, you can probably think of what some of those circumstances are. And I'll kind of highlight the last comment there, which is if you don't have flood insurance, even though you think you may not be in a flood zone, but you are in an area that is near flooding, strongly recommend you consider that. Many localities, people are reluctant to get it, but even if you're not in the 100-year floodplain or the 500-year floodplain, you can still carry it, and it is to your advantage to do so if you are able to do so, or to think about it, because it will help you in the long run. A few other safety tips, which are probably not a surprise to this group, but especially since hurricane season is upon us, nearly over, we hope, but driving through high waters, bad idea. Tends to be more of a problem in the western part of the state, but I showed you the picture of my neighborhood, Llewellyn Avenue. You'd be surprised how many people think they can get through there and then find out the hard way that they cannot. And what always fascinates me is you're driving through salt water. Do you really want to drive your car through salt water? If you can help it? No. Try to avoid that. We talked a little about hurricane and evacuation, which are not part of the evacuation strategy here, but you still may have to leave the area. You still may be impacted. And so we're encouraging everyone to consider this in their personal planning and their decisions in the event of a severe weather event. And I'd also like to ensure that you're aware of, in addition to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan work that the Commonwealth is doing this year, Virginia joined the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and through legislation passed by the 2020 General Assembly, funds received from the sale of carbon credits as being a part of that particular program, which requires that large emitters buy carbon credits to be able to emit carbon. In our case, that's Dominion. The sale of those credits generates revenue, and that revenue is returned to the state. It goes to two different funds. One is an energy efficiency fund, which is managed by the Department of Housing and Community Development. That's 50% of the money. 45% of the money, which you should be interested in hearing more about, goes to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. It is a statewide fund. It is focused on helping to build capacity and resilience to flood and flood hazards across the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is being administered by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. A first grant round has been completed and has been announced. A second grant round is underway. It closes next Friday. A third grant round is anticipated after the first of the year, and it will also include revolving loan capacity. The fund, as managed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, can be used for grants or loans. We're very focused on building capacity with this fund, helping localities do planning or studies or do a flood resilience plan for themselves. If they do not have one, you must have a flood resilience plan or a qualifying plan. So it could be part of hazard mitigation planning. It could be part of comprehensive planning or capital improvement planning. But you must have an approved plan through DCR to be able to then apply for money for projects. However, since we're building capacity, we're very interested in getting people to apply to do some of this planning so that they can then they have an approved plan, they can start doing projects or work within their communities. And again, it will have a loan capacity starting after the first of this year. There are 4 auctions a year. So far, we've had 3. The next one is December 1st. And for this fund alone, the state has yielded about $60 million. The first grant round offered $17 million. The second grant round is offering $18 million. We only issued so far $7.5 million out of the first grant round. Still working with communities who applied and who needed to make some modifications to some of their applications to be considered further. So it hasn't completely closed. And if any monies we don't issue out of the first grant round that were offered will be rolled into the second round for consideration. So we issued monies across the state, Buchanan County, all the way to Virginia Beach. So plenty of people applied. Some people already were able, some localities were able to get a qualified resilience plan in place, so they got money to do projects, but other people got money to do studies, to do resilience planning, to build capacity with their staff to help them do resilience planning or additional work in their community, within their locality. So if you haven't considered this, please take a look at the grant manual and please consider applying. If not for this grant, next up and coming grant round, which closes next Friday, that's pretty close, then for a future grant round. Keep your eyes peeled for things happening after the first of the year. So we are focusing on, again, I've said this, capacity building, but we're also want to ensure that projects that are applied for meet floodplain management standards and are consistent with local planning processes and objectives. And you must be a political subdivision of the Commonwealth to apply, or align with a political subdivision of the Commonwealth. So a political subdivision of the Commonwealth could apply for funds to do a project, and they could be partnering on that project with a nonprofit if they chose to. These funds may also be used to support match for federal grant programs. So they have some flexibility. They will be retained in the fund. They don't roll over every year and have to be reauthorized. And there's a 25% set aside for low-income communities, designated as localities or communities that are meeting an income standard of 80% of the median income of that locality or of that community. So that particular set aside is intended to help communities that are particularly underrepresented get more access to these kinds of funds now and in the future. We had no trouble meeting that requirement for the first grant round that was just released about 2 weeks ago. So there's plenty of need. We know there's plenty of need. This is the first time the Commonwealth of Virginia has put money against flood hazard planning or flood mitigation, other than federal grants that have come in through FEMA or other things. This is the first time the Commonwealth's money has been put against it. So I would encourage you and your localities to take advantage of it and make good use of it, because we know you need it. We know you need it. As we think about the master plan from the perspective of the Commonwealth, why would the state get involved in this, knowing that localities have the power to do their own thing and the responsibility to take care of themselves? Back to my comments at the beginning, we're trying to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to move forward, that localities who need more help get some, that localities who already have projects underway or already have plans underway are able to continue that work, perhaps give them a boost where they might need to do some additional planning, to ensure equity in the process so we aren't leaving behind communities who don't have a voice, who are not represented adequately, that we take a broader view across planning districts, regional commissions, and localities, and understanding that the needs of rural communities are different than the needs of urban, suburban, industrial communities, and that we begin to think about ways to put together funding strategies for this work. We have, working with our contractor, with Dewberry and their team, put together a funding database that will at least identify opportunities for projects that will be considered in the context of this plan over time, We have also built a statewide project database, coastal right now, could perhaps become statewide across the state in the future, where we've asked localities and planning districts to put in projects, and their partners, I should say, to put in projects that they know they have planned and that are publicly acknowledged by that community. So we have about 453 projects in the database right now. We know that is very low for the total number of things that are out there. There are planning districts with large numbers of projects that haven't had the capacity to get them in there. So this is the beginning. This is not the end. The database will also be publicly available, and all of the information from the analysis that Dewberry and their team have done, including the financial database that will tie specific funding opportunities that a project could qualify for to that project, so people at least know some idea where they might start, that will all be publicly available. We plan to release this first effort, this first master plan, early December. They're working on a date, and the web application and the data that goes with it will all be publicly available at that point as well. The master plan will be residing in the Department of Conservation and Recreation long term. It will be hosted through their website, and there is a program manager, Mr. Matt Dallin, who I'm not sure is on the call this evening, and a program coordinator, Mr. Connor Winstead, who are both DCR employees who are managing this process within the Department of Conservation and Recreation, in addition to the connectivity with the Office of the Governor and my position, which is also in code. So quite a lot going on here. We're working towards this first iteration. We've learned a great deal. And mostly what we've learned is why we need to keep doing this work, how important it is to build out this database, build out this capacity for coastal communities, and then consider expanding that capacity across the state so that we have a statewide flood resilience plan. We do have statewide flood resilience planning within DCR, but armed with what we've learned here, we'd like to expand that and do more. And the first step is to include rainfall flooding, which I talked about earlier, in the analysis, in the impact analysis and assessment, so that we can fully understand the threat and the risk, and then begin to evaluate and focus on areas at great risk based on that knowledge. So much more to be done here. Dewberry and team will be able to stay with us to do some of that work on the rainfall analysis. We've asked them for a proposal on that. We wrote it into the initial contract, so that work will continue through next year. And then we expect that we'll be updating the plan possibly as long as every 5 years eventually, but there will probably be a need to do an initial update after we better understand the coastal threat and decide how we're going to look broadly across the state. So much more work to be done here. If you're interested in following along, as I said, it's going to be on DCR's website right now. Everything is hosted on the related to the master plan on the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources website. You can learn about how we came to the point of getting a plan there. You can learn about a technical advisory committee, which has been advising the Commonwealth through the course of this work this first year. It includes planning district and regional commission directors, agency directors. Some of them you're seeing here: emergency management, Department of Conservation and Recreation, DEQ, VMRC, VDOT, just among others. It includes academic institutions with coastal adaptation and resilience centers from across the state. And we have we have the capacity to invite people to participate, and we have invited a number of people to participate because of their technical expertise, some within the state and some elsewhere. So a lot's been going on here in this context. We would like all of this to continue. You can follow along through these agencies, and you can also follow along through virginia.gov/coastal resilience. And we have an email address, resilientcoastpa@governor.virginia.gov. And we'll be happy if you have a question and you want to email us and contact us that way, please do so. And all of this will be collected and moved along to the Department of Conservation and Recreation at the end of this administration. Believe it or not, they start over from scratch with websites. But when you look at the Technical Advisory Committee website or the Master Plan website, you'll notice that all of these meetings have been recorded and they are posted there. And in addition to that, Technical Advisory Committee meetings have been recorded, subcommittee meetings to that Technical Advisory Committee have been recorded, agendas posted, slide materials are available, and we've already started the process of duplicating all that for GCR so that it will also be hosted on their website when they go live. So this is a public planning process. We actively solicit and encourage the public's participation, and it will continue to be so as we move forward, certainly with DCR and in the Office of the Governor. So thank you very much for your time this evening. There are probably questions, and if there are any in chat, Miss Ashley will let me know. Ashley Simoneski will let me know, and I'm happy to take your questions here as well. Well, from the perspective of a private property owner, there's all kinds of things you can do to think about making your own property resilient. I don't know what you've done or what you've considered, but and I also don't know the state of your shoreline. So you may want to make improvements to your shoreline. You may want to consider putting in a natural shoreline if that's possible. There's many different designs there that might be effective depending on your circumstances. You may also consider floodproofing your home, perhaps elevating HVAC if it's at ground level or that kind of thing. Installing flood vents if you think if you're that close and dealing with that kind of circumstance. You might consider elevating your home. People do that. There are programs that help do that. You can also do it yourself. It is not inexpensive as an option. Well, there are a number of different programs that might offer some solutions there. We have had localities come in and apply through the flood fund for support for programs like that they're running within their in their locality, and that's the Middle Peninsula is a good example of that. There are other programs such as VACRMP, which is a program that offers grants to the Soil and Water Conservation District to homeowners to improve their shorelines. I don't know, somebody may know, some of your localities, how active that is in this area. It is, Brent said yes. So that's an option. Don't quote me on the maximum amount, but I seem to recall that it's pretty good. Right. So that's a very decent amount of money to do a living shoreline. And that's an excellent program. And I'll tell you how excellent it is. It gets used up very quickly. There is money that comes into it every year from the General Assembly. But if you're not in a soil and water conservation district, you can't use that program. So if you live in the city of Norfolk, like me, that's not available to us. We're not in a soil and water conservation district. So that's something that you can take advantage of here that every locality maybe isn't able to take advantage of. So that's another option for you to think about. The Middle Peninsula is also doing, planning district also doing some other innovative fight the flood kinds of, they have a whole program with that title that helps property owners learn about the kinds of things that might help them make their property more resilient and then help them find access to the kind of people who do that sort of work. So that is a helpful program that exists in that planning district. But even here, I would encourage you to consider the VCAP program, and then also if you look at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, VIMS has an Adapt Virginia portal. That also, that website that VIMS maintains talks about all kinds of different living shoreline types and structures, and to give you some ideas of the kinds of things that might be considered for your area. They also have a full shoreline management database there, so you can look at the kinds of things that apply in your case based on the kind of shoreline you have within VIMS as well. So that's worth. You can also look at that online. It'll tell you a little bit more information about where you are in particular and the kinds of things that might apply in your case based on the topography and geography and what you're seeing in your area. Brett has a question. These SEAS, yep. It is.
to your property to give you.
Nope, sorry.
Okay, I'll go back on. And they are headquartered in South. They're not too far from here, so they do site visits, and you're fortunate that they're not too far from here. You can take advantage of that. Yes, sir. Are you, so there's economic development, there's EDA money. Again, Middle Peninsula has some success there. Are you familiar at all with the Go Virginia Region 5 and 6 grant? Okay. Because that's a similar kind of thing, using the public access authority as a test bed and what do you mean in Virginia or more broadly? So there's more broadly, there's the sky's the limit. But the state, what's important in the context of what's going on is in this state is because you're dealing with this. Oh, sorry. But I can't hear people if I'm back there. Things that are going on in the state are legal in the state. They're applicable under state law, state policy, and legislative actions and activities. So telling you to do something in Louisiana, that's a great idea, but if we can't do it here for some reason, there are a couple things to think about. First of all, within Virginia, particularly rural Virginia, there are a number of there are a lot of challenges. Most of the private property is private, or it's large federal property in this area, AP Hill, Dahlgren, and so the federal property is federal responsibility, and private property, of course, belongs to the property owner. So the challenge at the state level is: are we looking at individual private property owners, or are we trying to blend together a larger community of private property owners with similar challenges? And can we make more of a community impact from that perspective, that standpoint, rather than going one house here, one house over there, one house over here? Now, that doesn't mean that isn't important, but can that be managed at a more local level? So if, sorry, actually, if you wanted to apply for the community flood fund, for example, looking more broadly across more properties, or applying for some opportunity to help build capacity to look at it from an economic development standpoint. What else can you do in that context? The Eastern Shore applies to analysis of their agricultural community, because they're having not only saltwater inundation problems with being able to grow crops in some areas, but also excessive rainfall and flooding challenges. So, and they receive monies for that. So there are, I think, if you're thinking about, what can we do, maybe you want to learn about how we can think about what we want to do. That's the way that the fund can help you build capacity to do that kind of research and that analysis to help you start to strategize on your way forward. The Go Virginia grant is also a really good example. It's been, 4 years in the making. It's been quite a while. But we're following that to see how it goes. And then the other thing you refer to, which is part of that, is RISE, with Resilience Collaborative, which was formed as a part of that disaster response competition when they said we're awarded the city of Norfolk. But RISE is much broader than just Norfolk. It's an incubator to help businesses develop innovative ideas as solutions for coastal resilience. But that's what's true. This goes anywhere. The business could apply. Yes, the business could apply. So I mean, yeah, you're probably not going to apply as a county because you're not running the business. But if there's a business opportunity, if there's a company or an aspiring company in King George County, they can apply to RISE to become a part of that process. Well, but RISE, which is Resilience and Innovative Solutions, its name does not go with its acronym particularly. Is intended to be statewide from an innovation perspective. It's not limited to just Hampton Roads or just the Middle Peninsula. So any company can apply to work with them from anywhere across the state as long as they're looking at innovative, flood resilient solutions. So it's not, you wouldn't really need to start a new RISE, maybe, but if there's a cluster of businesses here or there's more than one person who's got some things that they would like to work on and develop, that could lead to an opportunity to partner again with Go Virginia, which gets back to your test bed idea. Other questions? Oh, we are recording this, so yeah. Private property can be considered in the context of the broader value to the community. So we've had localities come in and apply for private property, kind of working through what that process should be. But in general, when the state thinks about private property, it's thinking about how working on private property is going to improve the common public good. So 6 houses in a vulnerable area want to improve their property, want to improve their shorelines, and that is then going to protect the road behind them, which is an access to a fire station. Okay, that sounds like a great idea. But individual private properties remotely, that's a harder challenge. But maybe it isn't a good grant candidate. That doesn't mean it couldn't be a good loan candidate. And it also doesn't mean it can't be part of another program or use funding from another program source. So the challenge is helping people and communities and localities find solutions that work for them. We're one grant round into this, and we know we have more to do. But that's a good question, and it can be used for private property, and we're working through the nuances of how best to do that. Other questions here? Right. Mr. Hunsinger. Sure. Yeah. What does that mean? Right. So, meaning that rather than put up a large concrete bulkhead, we, the state is more interested in, by law now within legislation, green infrastructure, meaning living shorelines or hybrid living shorelines, where that is possible and feasible, and it does not work in every circumstance, we know that, to improve water quality as well as water management solutions and just generally improve the environment. When we look at projects, we divided that localities entered. We divided them into structural, which is primarily gray, hybrid, gray and green, and natural and nature-based, which is mostly green solution. So a natural solution rather than a hardscape or a hard gray structure. And knowing that everything isn't going to be solved by green infrastructure, if it has to be some kind of hardened solution, can it be as green as possible? Can we do something with it to improve water quality? Ecosystem services is kind of the term of art, but water quality, filtering out pollutants before it gets into the bay or other water bodies in the context of developing that and designing that project. So nature-based solutions to manage water could be shoreline-based. It's going to be some sort of living shoreline or a shoreline with a sill. There's all different designs there. It could be some way to break a fetch if you need that to help reduce erosion to some extent. There's all kinds of other challenges with erosion that, depending on the circumstances, could apply or could not apply. Could be a living shoreline. Could be another kind of a best management practice, a swale, bioswale, or some kind of like rain garden effort that helps at least retain water and lets it filter rather than having it all rush right into an area, or using that kind of a solution to divert water away from your home if it begins to pond somewhere rather than having it pond in an area where it might actually enter under your foundation or into your house, which you certainly don't want. So the whole point of the green solutions is we can bring in water quality, which has been a big deal for so long for those of us who are on the Chesapeake Bay, which is pretty much all of this entire watershed, and water management to help keep people and property safe while still controlling water and doing it in as green a way as possible. Other questions? Right, there's a whole, right, this is bioswale and rain garden and water retention area and all natural plants too. I've noticed as I came in here, so quite a bit of work has been done here to make it really interesting. And it all looks great. Whoever designed it knew what they were doing because everything looks very healthy. Are there other questions online? Okay. So if there aren't any other questions, go ahead, sir. Getting that. Yep. Very well. Thank you very much for adding that. That's something that's changed a lot in the past few years. And if you're me and you have it turned on for both Richmond and Hampton Roads, then you get all of them all at once. It's terrific. But we didn't, we didn't. That's new. So it's a great service, and it's a great value to, especially in a community where you like to say you're split between news sectors. And I don't tonight's kind of weird. I don't know what's going to happen. I was paying attention because I had to drive up here. I have to drive back in it too. So I'll get on the phone before I go and see where we got. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to the people who joined us online. We appreciate that. What we're going to do at this point is break down and stop our recording. And there are a couple of activities here. We're particularly interested in people telling us where you see flood hazards and flood challenges in your neighborhood and in your communities. So we'll ask the people in the room to please take a look at that, share with us what they would like. We'll be grateful to have it, and any other comments you would like. And we'll go from there, so that we will end the recording at this point, unless there are any other questions that have appeared in chat. All right, thank you, everyone.